Hello everyone, it's Takuya here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. And on that note, also welcome back to the second episode of I Watched It So That You Didn't Have To, Netflix's African Queen's Njinga. Thank you for all the love and support that you've shown this series so far, and I ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. I really do enjoy teaching history and analyzing these different things, and I have to admit, the previous episode was not nearly as bad as what we had seen from Queen Cleopatra. Of course, I had some concerns going into it because of the melodrama and things when it was talking about slavery, but are those concerns actually warranted? Well, let's see how things proceed here with the second episode. So if you remember from the way things end in the previous episode, Princess Njinga went off to meet with the Imangala in order to forge an alliance, but it's weird in the way that it has this whole thing set up because she was in exile, and they do actually talk about this, but it doesn't express this from the beginning of what happened in the previous episode, because the reason why she was gone, the reason why she was out here doing any of this in the first place is because she had to flee from Kabasa. She had to flee from the capital specifically because she feared her life being taken by her brother who had already murdered her son, and mind you, forcibly sterilized her and her sisters, which it doesn't talk about. And while it does show her teaming up with a small segment of the Imangala, which she does do, it simultaneously does it in a kind of weird order and doesn't then show that it was her brother who had forged an alliance with two different tribes of the Imangala. So it's weird. But then we move on, and oh, lo and behold, the city of Kabasa itself is getting sacked by the Portuguese, because the Portuguese did at this time actually launch a raid, but the way that they're showing this is easily the dumbest thing that I think that I've ever seen. It doesn't make any sense for any kind of raid. Because, okay, they're super few in number. You're seeing the scene right here, as everyone is kind of running around, and oh, okay, here's one guy that's running around with a gun, and there's right next to the king, okay? And then as someone is running away, they're chasing after him, and one guy pulls out a gun to shoot. Like, if this is a raid to capture slaves or to do anything like that, you're not going to be going around just shooting people. And also, simultaneously, an individual person at this time is not going to be running around with a giant matchlock just firing. This is a one-shot weapon. Once you have fired that gun, it's done. You can't do anything else. The thing that confuses a lot of people when they talk about early, say, colonial period going into the early imperial period, like we're talking from the 1500s going into the 1600s, is that at this time, guns were the standard force for armies. Like, that's what you would have, is you would have gunmen, but simultaneously they would work hand in hand with melee infantry. Like, you would have swordsmen, you'd have pikemen, you'd have these kinds of things. Less so going into the 1600s as it started to transition more to guns, but simultaneously, you still would have been seeing people move in more with melee weapons that they had over others, and they would have kept in formation if they were using guns. They're not going to be running around with a matchlock like it's Call of Duty or anything. This isn't running or gunning. You can't do that with a matchlock. Weird thing to obsess over in the beginning, I know, but this is a really dumb depiction of a raid. It doesn't really make any sense. But then, of course, it talks about how Njinga is off in the wilds here, and she is working with some Imangala forces and her own in order to continuously launch raids upon the Portuguese who have their own little kind of scouting forces or slave trading forces or anything that is in the environment. And it shows a scene of that in which she launches a strike on them herself that she is leading and starts it by throwing an axe, and then her forces move in and hack down the rest of them. Nothing inherently necessarily wrong with it. It's actually good that it's showing from the beginning how she was launching these little raids, and that is something that she was doing in the meantime in order to shore up her own power base. That is something that she did. Though starting off everything with an axe throw is just dramatic and weird. It doesn't really make much sense. If you're going to be doing that from a distance, you could have very easily used like a bow and arrow or something and then charged with the blade. Anyway, it talks about how she's been moving in order to try and disrupt different routes for the slave routes because these are the things that are providing the Portuguese with income. After the raid on Kabasa, King Mande was forced to retreat out to one of his island fortress retreats. And it's so bad for him that he does end up actually calling Njinga back because he needs her to be the person that goes and negotiates with the Portuguese, because this is real. What they're showing, even if the lines are fictionalized, is that the actions that they're taking at this point are real, but again, I don't know why it's not showing that Mande was working with the Imangala at all. It's like he's completely on his own and only she is doing it, which is not true. Because what was going on at this time, while Njinga was in exile in Matamba, was that to the west, the Portuguese had pretty much pried half of the kingdom away from her brother. And it does not talk about this, but a whole bunch of the influential sobas that were around the area, because they were seeing which way the winds were turning, they started to pledge their fealty to the Portuguese instead, because it really doesn't do a good job addressing just how incredibly decentralized things within these African kingdoms were, and how the individual nobles that controlled all these different areas around the kingdom, well, they were the ones who, they weren't directly governed by the king, they pledged fealty to the king and would pay them tribute, but in this case, they were just switching over their fealty to the Portuguese and sending the tribute to the Portuguese. That's actually where a large amount of the Portuguese slave trade was even coming from, was in this form of tribute. And so to put a stop to all of this, Mbande calls her back, and it shows that he is asking her to please negotiate with the Portuguese. And yes, he does do this. He does ask for her help, but simultaneously, this whole dialogue that it has between them is so incredibly cringy and whiny, because we know, and they do cover this over the course of the episode, that Mbande's mental health at this point is rapidly deteriorating. All of his failures are lining up, and he is not doing so hot. That thing that it showed in the previous thing with Cleopatra and how whiny Mark Antony was, well, Mbande in this case, that's a little bit more accurate. But still, it's weird because he talks about how, oh, she managed to do all these amazing things with the Imangala and she's done all of this stuff, and complimenting her. When it's like, it doesn't even talk about how he himself already did have an alliance with some of the Imangala. It's not only her that is accomplishing things, he just hasn't really been able to do much. So it's a little weird that they don't acknowledge it, but as they move on and the discussion occurs, it makes him even more whiny and cryy, and she has to be like the big sister who has to step in and tell him, no, you are still king and we will follow you, we will obey you. It does this whole line about her being this dutiful subject and only wanting best for the kingdom and to support him, which maybe, but the dialogue in here is so incredibly cringy, and simultaneously, no, she was working to undermine him the entire time. She was not trying to just support him in all of his endeavors. But no, she has to be a dutiful sister, she's only thinking about protecting the people, they're saying, and keeping as many people out of the slave trade as possible. This is a thing that it keeps on referring back to in this series, talking about the evils of the slave trade. And I would be an idiot if I was going in here and trying to defend the slave trade, because my God, it's an awful thing. But it's very weird how they keep on formatting their critique of it in saying that she was like a freedom fighter who was trying to keep as many people out of the slave trade as possible. That's not true. What she wanted was for the kingdom of Ndongo to have control over its own slave trade. They didn't want the Portuguese in on it, not because they were going to be exporting all of their people or anything like that, though that was a concern that they would lose too many and there wouldn't be as many subjects, but that simultaneously, the slave trade was one of the big cornerstones of the Ndongo economy. So if they lost that to the Portuguese, that would really damage the wealth and reputation of the kingdom itself. They keep on applying morals to it when the argument against it is more economic. To clarify, she is not anti-slavery, and do not let Netflix give you that impression that she was. She was anti-Portuguese. There's a very big difference, Netflix. Which, yeah, on that note, they're talking about how West Central Africa is going through massive turmoil, that the Portuguese are going into villages and to towns and to cities that they are raiding for slaves, which is something that they are doing. But mind you, the raids of what it is that they are launching, the goal of which is not to just seize people, because seizing people through violence is never actually something that is sustainable in the long term. The goal of what they've done is that they moved in and attacked and targeted places, and they have launched raids, but the big goal is to have the Sobas, these individual nobles, pledge loyalty to them in order to provide tribute to them as they gradually usurp authority within the region. They do not have the numbers to wage a full-scale war to just steal people. But no, they're destroying and pillaging, ravaging society. Yeah, so is pretty much every other group that is here. Ndongo is not a place of peace. They are constantly been fighting with the Imangala before this. They had rivalry with the Congo. All these different decentralized kingdoms and families and everything within society were constantly fighting one another. It's one of the things that fueled the slave trade there in the first place before the arrival of the Portuguese. They talk about how the Portuguese built a fort, how it's threatening the capital, which is all true. And Njinga comes back and tells everyone that yes, she is going to be going to the Portuguese and she's going to be serving as the ambassador for them. But then the lines that it puts in here, because I want to look that governor in the eye when he gives us back everything that he's taken from us. Like, again, Netflix, I don't know where you're getting any of these lines from. It's all stuff to set her up as a hero. Now, one of the interesting and good things that they touch upon is the fact that when she shows up to negotiate, she does not show up dressed as a European. She does not show up to supplicate herself. She shows up in full royal gear with a massive army of attendants, decked to the nines in traditional royal wear, in all this colorful garb, in this mix of like European and native music, whatever she can do to bring attention to herself, she's showing up fully decked out. And they do a good job demonstrating of how she did that. They talk about how the fact that Portugal has a new governor in the area, de Sousa, how they didn't expect to receive a woman as a diplomat, and then there's something I'm going to comment on here later, but they keep on saying in these lines, this lady in particular, oh, I think, oh, I believe, I feel. The amount of times that they say that over the course of this documentary gets really annoying, because what they keep on doing is they keep on ascribing feelings and thoughts to people's actions without actually knowing them. And I'll point out some more here as time goes on, but this is a continuous thing that they do throughout this entire thing. So of course, meeting goes down, they all show up, and over the course of this entire interaction that exists between Njinga and the governor, it's incredibly cringy bad dialogue, Netflix. There's all these different one-liners and other things that are put in that we don't know are accurate. Like she puts a whole thing about, oh, if they send a messenger, it would be a shame if anything happened to him because the roads are just so dangerous, which sounds so dumb, but I can't actually really fault them here for that, because the record of the meeting states that what she did over the course of it was a distinct mix between flattery and threats. Veiled threats, to be sure, but still threats. She definitely knew how to keep the governor and his attendants on their toes because she was a very skilled diplomat that did speak Portuguese. That's one of the reasons why she was so valuable at this time. And as they start their meeting, and I'm really glad that Netflix does cover this, this is a real event where as the governor sits in his chair to begin the meeting, they don't have a seat that is offered to her, expecting her to sit on the floor, the idea being to humiliate her. What she does instead is that she has one of her attendants move forward, sit on the ground, or rather get on all fours so that she can sit and look at them in the eye and debate as an equal partner in conversation. That's real. That happened. This isn't Netflix dramatizing it or anything like that. That is a real thing that she did. So they don't need to exaggerate it. What they don't talk about in this documentary is that the way that these negotiations then play out afterwards is that once everything is said and done, apparently the story goes is that as she had stood up, she left her servant behind as a gift. And when the governor commented about it, how she left her servant there, she'd said, oh, that a ruler has many chairs and she's only going to use it once, leaving it as a gift for them. Because mind you, this attendant was one of her slaves, because she had slaves, that was then given as a gift to the Portuguese. That's at least part of the story for how it goes, and they don't show that in this whole sequence of events. But the funny thing is, again, they will continuously talk about how she's viewing all these things for negativity for slavery, but she was always willing to offer slaves to the Portuguese and to sell them to them because it's how she would end up fueling later parts of her economy. And again, every single time anything is mentioned for slavery and the Portuguese, they talk about how the Portuguese have this insatiable appetite and how they always want more people. And like, yes, this is true, but it shows none of the nuance of the trade and what is going on. As an example, that thing that I talked about with the Sobas and how they would offer tribute specifically in slaves yearly, the Portuguese want to continue that same kind of relationship with Ndongo that they talk about, because one of the points of their negotiation is that they want for Njinga to offer yearly tribute in slaves, and that's one of the conditions that they have for peace, which she refuses, stating that she's not going to because that is something that only a conquered kingdom would do, and her kingdom has not been conquered. All of this is so far accurate. The actions that are taking place for what they are doing is accurate. It's more so the meaning behind the words that they are using that becomes a little bit of an issue, because they're not showing the nuance of it all. Like, Njinga refuses to give tribute that is actually people, as though that's the issue, and not the fact that she doesn't want to give tribute because giving tribute means that they've lost. That is against what she thinks is right. No, that is not true. They keep on implying, or at some points like this, outright stating beliefs of morality when it comes to Njinga, but she is an exceptionally complex character, and they do not give that in the show. They make her so much more of a hero than she actually was. She accomplished amazing and great things, but she was simultaneously ruthless and brutal and willing to do what we would consider to be terrible things in order to achieve her goals. Talking about her not doing what goes against what she thinks is right is complete and utter moral bullshit that Netflix is trying to put in here in order to shore up her own character. Things continue to go on with the meeting. They all sit to have dinner in here. She's showing how she's so politically savvy. And then one of the things that ends up happening is that because negotiations are going nowhere, she, in this, apparently then goes to sit down with Ana de Silva, the woman who would end up helping her get baptized. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. The interaction that they have over the course of their conversation and to talk about their men and trust and giving their word, and how Ana is apparently implying to her or stating to her that the only way that they could truly trust one another is that she gets baptized and converts to Christianity. But that doesn't seem to have been a thing that occurred specifically from this dinner. They're acting like over the course of this, she's being introduced to Christianity and a lot of these ideas for the first time, but that's not true. The entire reason as to why she can speak Portuguese in the first place is because she was taught and exposed to missionaries. She knew the beliefs. She always had this idea of converting as a kind of last-ditch tool that she could use, just something in her back pocket. That didn't just suddenly occur to her at this time at dinner that she should do it. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, they don't want to depict her like that in Netflix. No. It has to be thrust upon her at this time, so she has to look down and question and think about things and make a split-second decision, and then show how conflicted she is over the idea of giving into baptism, where that whole thing was a key political tool that she wanted to utilize. It's weird how it's showing this back and forth attitude for the sake of drama when it's completely unnecessary and was a tool that she was perfectly willing and ready to use. But the scene immediately after this is something that ends up bothering me because what it shows is her and her sisters in attendance walking through the city, hearing a scream, and then being brought, or rather bringing themselves to the slave market where they can witness and see what is going on, where they comment then about the evils of what it is that they see. And yeah, they talk about the difference between the Portuguese type of chattel slavery versus the slavery that is utilized within the Kingdom of Ndongo itself. And there is a real difference between it, there is. But it doesn't talk about how a lot of these slaves that are at this market are not there because they were just captured. They were specifically given either in tribute or sold to the Portuguese because of the slave trade that already exists within the kingdom. Njinga knows that it is devastating her people. Now, the issue that she has is that it's devastating the economy, specifically because they're losing control over the trade that they already had. She's seen hundreds of people being captured and kidnapped. How many so far? I lost count days ago. If we don't do something to end this now, our people will be no more. Like, they're putting in these lines, this dialogue that, again, for a time in which slavery is completely normalized, this makes no sense. You also have to remember that the key aspect of what they're talking about for the Kingdom of Ndongo is that they don't just want control over their own slave trade. They specifically want to be able to launch attacks on other peoples around them, capture them, and sell them into slavery so that they could fuel their own economy. That is a big aspect of this, specifically from war parties and raids that they themselves would be launching. It's just such bad dialogue that makes no sense and is blatantly hypocritical. They do talk about the horrors, though, of chattel slavery, and the things that they are talking about for life expectancy in 78 years, it's all accurate, especially with the ones that are being shipped down to Brazil. It's not a good situation at all. But again, every single time this person seems to appear on the screen, but I do think that she believes that she can contain it, like talking about slavery. No, Njinga doesn't want to contain slavery. She wants to control it because she wants to be the one that is in charge of the trade itself for money. This is so weird because over the course of this, again, they keep on reading into people's thoughts and their beliefs, all in an effort in order to try and stylize them as either a villain or a hero. They keep on reading into people's mindsets, and it's annoying. Anyway, it shows her getting baptized, the Portuguese agreeing to her demands, they end up making peace. And as she comes back in triumph and the people love and celebrate her, they talk about how Monday probably feels sidelined or marginalized within the community. And again, using I think, I feel. It's a continuous thing over the course of this episode, but it is kind of true in this case. Monday definitely has lost a lot of his political power and prestige over the years, and he's from that more than likely losing his mind. All of this is real, but what it doesn't talk about, and I will mention again later on, is that over the course of the previous years, and also going into this, she was not the dutiful sister that was always working on behalf of her brother, like it's trying to depict here. Consistently, over the course of the years, she would specifically work to rally people against him. She was always working to undermine him and support her own authority. And then over the course of this made-up conversation, she's meeting with the king and is telling him, I saw the scale of it. What? the trade in our people. As though, yeah, it's a slave market. They had seen the same kind of thing before themselves. They're talking about this issue with slavery in horror as though this is some kind of line out of a movie, which again is another example of Netflix not showing the nuance of the situation at all. She's trying to get him to see that, how the Portuguese are the overall greater evil and how they have to work together to go against them. But these lines of support that she is showing towards her brother just all appear to be wrong, that she wasn't nearly as supportive of the king as Netflix is trying to show, because she herself was trying to undermine him for years. Like, here's the issue. Over the course of this conversation, it gets to the point where Mande says to her that he wants her to be regent until his son is able to come of age, which is something that did end up happening. He did want to appoint her as regent, but that would give Njinga every kind of incentive in order to move against him, in order to hasten that to happen. Because as he grew dependent upon her for political advice, Njinga would gradually move her brother to a psychological breaking point. She would do things in court, from berating him, needling him. She would discredit him behind his back. And she would also push him to take hardline stances with the Portuguese, which you can say that, oh, she did that specifically in order to fight against the Portuguese, but it seems more so with how she was treating him as king, that she specifically was trying to weaken his position in order to make it so that she would be able to take charge. But Netflix doesn't show any of that, and instead just shows her as the dutiful sister who is working with her brother. And then, okay, so a few months passed, the treaty is working out just fine so far, and then all of a sudden, the city itself of Cabasa comes under attack by Kisenje's forces, the Imangala warrior who has been moving against them the entire time. And this would actually end up driving them out of their kingdom and forcing them into exile, which is a real event that happened, but this whole sequence that it shows in this is so dramatic and dumb. Like, she runs out of this building, everything is on fire, and she looks, and there's Kisenje, the leader of the enemy forces, just staring at her from the side, pointing a bow in her direction. And there's this back and forth sequence with dramatic music as they're looking at one another. It's just so unnecessarily dramatic as she moves to flee. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's so bad. But okay, Netflix implies from this that because the Imangala are mercenaries, that it's the Portuguese who have started to renege on their deal from the beginning by having the Imangala go and attack the city of Cabasa. But they imply this in the first place with A, no proof, and B, the other issue is that they had already been fighting the Imangala and Kisenje for a long time prior to this. The Imangala were not working with the Portuguese because they were just within the employment of the Portuguese. That was an alliance that had gone on as a matter of convenience for a while, but simultaneously, they were already fighting with the people of Ndongo from the first place. So these implications that they're putting in this are just weird. Like Netflix, they were already trying to take over the kingdom. You don't need to imply these things that you don't know. So the royal family is forced to flee. They're trying to figure out what it is that they need to do. The king says that they need to go back and reach out to the Portuguese for help in order to honor the treaty, which I guess is something that does happen. They do have to try and reach out to the Portuguese in order to get help. And of course, Njinga doesn't want to do this because she is very anti-Portuguese, as it's showing. But the king orders it anyway, and so after meeting with the Portuguese diplomat, who in this case is a priest, the priest tells him that he has to convert to Christianity and submit to the king of Portugal in order to get help. Which, I mean, the line of what was supposed to happen is that the order was to convert to Christianity, but this whole interaction with the priest they have in the first place, with how angry she gets and how she's pushing him and trying to push her brother to take a hardline stance against the Portuguese, it is real that she did push him to take a harder stance. But it keeps on showing it as though she's doing it out of a duty for her people and not as a political ploy, which is a very distinct possibility here. And simultaneously, the lines that they put in here about her critiquing the Catholic priest. Oh, I'm here to do the Lord's work. What kind of God do you have that would support your people and not mine? And then also comments about putting people in chains, which again is weird, again, since we're talking about a state that had a active, thriving slave trade. Again, Netflix, it's just weird, hypocritical lines to try and put her in a better light than what she already was. Either way, over the course of these negotiations, where her culture is getting critiqued the entire time, the Portuguese do end up reneging on their promises, because they do say that they're not going to actually help them take the city of Cabasa, that the alliance will not actually stand unless they're able to do it themselves and convert to Christianity. So negotiations end up collapsing, things go nowhere, and then they talk about how, as a result of all this going down and everything falling apart, Mbande does fall into a deep depression, and then ends up being offed by poison. Though whether this is being done by or whether this is him being poisoned. It doesn't really say, but at least the Netflix show does go on to say that it is a distinct possibility that because of all the issues with, you know, her child being assassinated by Monday, that she could have poisoned her brother or been at least a part of it. All of this is real, and immediately afterwards, she does move to try and secure her own power within the council. Again, I think she saw this as an opportunity. Stop saying I think, I believe, I feel. It is very frustrating. But simultaneously, I can't fault Netflix too bad, at least in this part, because they do talk about how it is a distinct possibility that she did end up killing her brother. It doesn't really show these sequences as being the truth, mind you, but it does explain that it is a possibility that she did and that no one is ever able to really confirm this. But they really do leave it so much more gray area because it does not talk about, again, over the course of the entire episode, how she was moving against her brother for years prior to this, weakening him, which just increases the likelihood that she was trying to take over in the first place and would have him poisoned. But no, they keep her as a more dutiful sister in order to make the entire thing significantly more ambiguous. God, the lines like this, I feel like I'm stealing something that belongs to someone else, referring to the crown and the throne. The issue is with this, it keeps on putting in things about her character that is establishing her as a prophetic leader, like someone who was destined from birth to lead, but really doesn't want to, like she's being forced into these positions. When no, she was actively seeking power the entire time. She wasn't some reluctant hero, Netflix. This isn't some storybook. She is a real historical character with her own power-hungry demands. So in order to secure her power, then, what she goes and does, after a series of very cringy dialogue lines, is she goes and marries Casa, that guy from earlier, the Imangala warrior that she's teaming up, the much younger guy who is in charge of taking care of her nephew, the son of Mbambe. And she does publicly woo him, essentially offering the world, because she's offering him a kingdom to rule. She wants him to be king in order to shore up her own power and secure his warriors. All real that she does this. And while the dialogue is cringy, we don't know what it is that they did say, and the end result is the same. That again, she does woo him, making him believe that she does love him and that she wants him. So very soon after, they get married, and again, Netflix doesn't actually shy away from this. At least this shows some of the complexity of her character, because in order to secure her power base, at her wedding, her nephew, the one that she was supposed to be taking care of, she takes care of him in a completely different way, and at her wedding has him assassinated, the 7-year-old. This is the real event that took place, and I am really glad that Netflix did not shy away from this. That is a real event, and it does show how she was willing to do terrible things in order to seize her power and secure her authority. As the episode is called, Power is Not Given, implying that it is taken. That is true, which that in turn is the end of the episode. The child lays dead, the wedding is over, and she has secured her authority. It's over. Guys, I will go ahead and say this right now. Here's my take on this episode. Over the course of this, when they have been showing sequences of political events, I would say that they've done a significantly better job showing this now than what they did with Queen Cleopatra. The worrying trend that I have of this, that I had from the beginning, and I did express this, is that every time they mention slavery, they are exceptionally hypocritical about it. That and the dramatic dialogue that is put into place in here is just bad. They keep on doing things to try and show Njinga as a hero, as a dutiful sister, as all these different things in order to play up her positive traits, and it doesn't really show any of her ruthlessness until it comes as an immediate action upon killing her nephew. That so far is the only indication that we have of her desire for power, which sucks because that's not accurate for her. She was actively moving to do these things from the very beginning. It just doesn't show any of it. It's Netflix working to make her a more positive character than she actually is. But either way, that is the end of the second episode, and I ask that you like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what it is that you think. We're going to be moving on over here to the third episode next, and I really do appreciate all of you for watching and for supporting my channel. Thank you all very much. I appreciate all of you, and goodbye, guys. I will see you next time.